Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk of WilksWorld.com, and man, do we have a fantastic guest joining us today. Scott H. Silverman is a crisis coach and addiction interventionist that is joining me on the Derate the Hate podcast to talk about addiction and relapses in the COVID age. But first, we did not create the hate, but with your help, we can derate the hate. It's all about bettering the world one attitude at a time, and we do that as individuals. It's about each of us practicing individual accountability. So what have you done today to make your life a better life? What have you done today to make the world a better place? Again, bettering the world one attitude at a time starts with you, it starts with me, it starts with each and every one of us as an individual. Another way you can make the world a better place is to share the Derate the Hate podcast wherever you think the most people will get to see it and get to listen to it. Also, leaving ratings and leaving feedback wherever you get your audio is a big help too. It helps to boost us up in the ratings. It helps to help people find us, and another fantastic way to better the world. Now, talking about our guest this week, Scott H. Silverman. Scott is an expert crisis coach and family navigator, encouraging families and individuals to move forward on the road to recovery. Scott has been featured on multiple news and media outlets for his expertise about addiction and recovery. He is an author, an interventionist, and fellow podcaster. Scott knows what addiction and hopelessness are because he's been there. Scott has spent nearly 4 decades in recovery. It was during a business trip more than 35 years ago. Scott was on the edge, or literally on a ledge, struggling from addiction, considering suicide, and feeling like things were unraveling. He was at rock bottom. The day after trying to kill himself, he flew home and immediately entered treatment. He lived the embarrassment, the fear, and the helplessness surrounding addiction. But most importantly, he has come out the other side whole again. Today, Scott is the CEO and leads the team at Confidential Recovery, an intensive outpatient substance abuse recovery program based in San Diego, California. I'm incredibly honored this week to have Scott H. Silverman join me on the Derate the Hate podcast. You do not want to miss this conversation. Scott Silverman, can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining me on the Derate the Hate podcast. You're a crisis counselor, a crisis coach. You're a recovering addict. You run a recovery center now. Why don't you introduce yourself to the Derate the Hate listeners, and we'll dive into our topic today.
Sure. Well, I'm Scott H. Silverman. I like to throw the H in there because there's a guy in Japan who has the same name, and he gets upset because whenever I do something, he gets phone calls and he goes, "Oh my God, Scott, I'm going to have to join your entity one day." I said, "No, I'll just keep the H there and just let people know you're in Japan. It'll be a different thing, And I don't know exactly what you want to know. I grew up in San Diego, still live here. My family's here. My youngest just moved to New York, and my oldest daughter's here in San Diego, and my wife and I, God willing, knock on wood, we're going to be celebrating 40 years being together. And she was with me the last 2 years of my drinking and using. So she's not only an advocate, but she's also a well-informed, significant other to somebody who suffered from addiction. So it's nice to have her in my life. And, she never really partied, which was good because that means I got to do my own stuff all the time. Well, I didn't have to share with my wife. One of my stories, and I just wrote my second book, The Opioid Epidemic, and I'm in the business of helping people, and I'm one of those hopeless helpers who will do whatever I can when somebody calls me and says, I need help. And, 3 of the hardest words in the English language is I need help. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and to talk about whatever you think's relevant. And if your audience ever needs me for anything, I put my number out there, and it's 619-993-2738, 619-993-2738. And you can always Google me, and I'll talk to anybody anywhere on the planet if I can be of assistance or support or an advocate or, help you navigate. I call myself a family navigator because that's really what I've, over the years with my experience and bumping my head and making mistakes, that's what I think my real expertise is, helping families really. What do I do with Junior? And, Junior's still using. how old is Junior? Well, Junior's 47, and we've been living with this pain, with his addiction for so long. I said, well, why? And we talk about it. And I said, you do have a choice. You do have a choice. So we talk about creating a new language and talking about setting parameters and setting up boundaries and, never stop loving and know that, Junior has a disease just like diabetes. And if Junior's not getting treated and he's walking around untreated, then it's never going to stop. And according to science, the end result are jails, institutions, or death. Yep, and the fourth option is getting help. So that's, and it's sometimes just, not being related to the person who has the issue. I can have that conversation with them and really lay it out in a way that not only informs, but also hopefully motivates.
Right.
My attitude is, look, if everything's going well in your life, don't change a thing. But if you're getting arrested under the influence and you've lost a couple jobs and maybe a significant other or two, and you're not really able to manage your life the way you want to, getting help is really critical. I mean, we do it with diets, we do it with disease, we do it with cancer, we do it with, being overweight or having an eating disorder. We do it with gambling, and if you have a problem in your relationship, you usually go get some help. So my attitude is, why not take a look at options and opportunities?
Well, sometimes having that outside perspective, Scott, just like you said, I mean, sometimes when it's too close to somebody, they just don't realize it. They don't see it. They don't see it because they don't want to see it. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot in your journey here. The reason that I've asked you to join me, Scott, on the Derate the Hate podcast is because we face a unique time in our country's history right now. The pandemic has garnered a response from the powers that be, let's say, that has caused a lot of damage to a lot of people. And in doing some research and trying to find the right person to talk about this, I come across some of the things that you've done, some of the things that you've written. And one of the things that you talk about is the mental health crisis that's come as a result of the pandemic and the pandemic response. We all know that there's been countless businesses, people that, small business owners, and we could talk all day long about the, Monday morning quarterbacking, the decisions that came to it. But the reality is a lot of people lost their businesses. A lot of people lost their livelihoods. And a lot of people are suffering from mental health crises, and those mental health crises are leading to many addiction relapses, suicides, things like that. You being a crisis coach, crisis counselor, running a crisis intervention center, Scott, talk about the kinds of things that you are seeing now with people in crisis that are calling you. I think it's incredible that you've put your phone number out there. You've put yourself out there as a resource for so many other entities, that refer people to you. Talk about the kinds of things that you're seeing, Scott, as a result of these events that have taken place over the past couple of years, and what it's done to lives and how you're dealing with that.
Okay. Well, let me start with kind of an organic personal experience. I go to recovery meetings, I used to go once or twice a week. Now I'm going 4 to 5 times a week because it's on Zoom. So it allows me easy access to it no matter where I am, what I'm doing. And since I've been in quarantine for a couple of years now, it feels like I go to my group, and in my own personal group, and I'm not going to break anyone's anonymity, I personally have witnessed probably a third of the people that I know go through some relapses. And I think part of the causation is, first of all, we as human beings are not built to be alone. And loneliness and being alone can be its own enemy, if you will, to human beings who are in recovery specifically because they're used to interacting with others. The social model of recovery, meaning people being with people, is so critical that when that went away, what happened was most people that I've seen, not only in my personal experience, but in my professional experience and as an interventionist, and with the calls that I get and the interviews that I do in different parts of the country. And what's fascinating is it's not isolated to this economic group or to that zip code or to a climate issue or a geographic issue or a political issue. It's human beings don't do well when they're left alone, and especially when they're in these circumstances. For example, San Diego, 30% of our businesses closed down and have not reopened. Unemployment rates, have gone up and down. Domestic violence is up dramatically. Child abuse is up dramatically. Alcohol consumption is up over 75%. We in San Diego, which is a pretty progressive city, I think, 3.3 million people, we're a border town. So we've seen all kinds of illicit substances coming across our border for one reason or another, a variety of different ways. We had an overdose rate in 2021 that went up over 600%. That's 600% in 1 year. And I know big cities, big major metropolitan areas have gone up as well. So the bottom line is, this is a perfect storm. I even know personally psychiatrists who have shared with me their colleagues who have taken their own life during this period of time because their work of being with others was basically taken away when COVID caused people to not leave the house, or it was imposed or basically mandated, don't go around others unless you know who they are until we get a handle on this, virus. And it's been, 2.5 years now, it feels like, that we have been under the scrutiny of, the CDC and the county and the state supervision, the federal regs to say, look, this thing is so contagious. Yes, you may or may not die from it, but a lot of people are. And those who have been impacted by it, it's just been horrific. And I like the term pressure bust pipes. So when you think about what COVID has, and again, going back to the experts, no one has ever experienced this. No one, from a behavioral health perspective or a mental health perspective, have seen the circumstances go the way they've gone the last couple of years. And, the ripple effect, in my opinion, is going to go on for many, many more years. Young people not going to school, youngsters, if you will, very young people who may have had trauma at home would come to school. A teacher might see it. They could intervene on it. And that's why domestic violence is up so high. That's why child abuse is up so high, because there's really no way for kids to check in. So we don't know what the scars are going to be like from this. And to me, it's also a mental health epidemic, to the point that mental health management has gotten so precarious. I have a license here, and there's a certificate they call it in California. A primary diagnosis has to be with substance use disorder. We're getting ready to try to get our license amended so we can treat people who have a behavioral health or a mental health issue as a primary diagnosis. And the only reason that's important is insurance won't pay us if it's only a mental health issue. It has somebody has to come to us and be diagnosed with the substance use disorder. Then we can treat them for the underlying, which would be the mental health, versus a primary who somebody may have a mental health issue, but doesn't necessarily have a substance use disorder. So we're looking to expand the way we treat people just because of what's happened the last couple of years. I hope that answers your question, that if anybody out there thinks that COVID hasn't impacted us in a negative way, they're suffering from a level of anesthetic mindsets where they're so loaded, they can't even figure it out, or their denial is so great, or they just don't want to believe it's true.
So let's talk about that. You said the word perfect storm, Scott. When you say perfect storm, what do you think, from your opinion, as a professional in this field, what is that perfect storm? What is the recipe in most cases for a relapse? I mean, I know we've talked about the isolation. We are social, human beings are social creatures. I just talked about it in a recent episode of the Derate the Hate podcast. We've become a drive-through society. People are afraid to be around each other. Drive-through lines on some of these restaurants go around the building twice in some cases, because people just aren't going inside. They're not congregating and getting together with people like they used to. Let's talk about that phrase that you used, perfect storm.
Yeah. To answer your question, I think you said it. Loss of a job, the stressors of people being at home, not being able to go out and socialize or decompress, if you will, or even go to a sports event or a concert, the kind of things that people do organically, which is where they get up and dance, yell and scream or cheer, whatever it might be, or just go out and, eat some, great food and just socialize. Not having that in our lives, is phase one. That's really been, traumatizing for people, like you said, and the delivery of food people are doing, but that keeps them at home 24 hours, 7 days a week. And historically, as human beings, we are not isolators. We're not good when we isolate. We don't do well when we are alone. And watching lots of TV, and kids, younger people have been on the internet, and we're seeing this spike in internet, connectivity and addiction, because they used to be maybe 4 or 5 hours in social media, and now it's 10, 12, 14, and they're sitting there on their iPhone with their, their MacBook or their iPad while they're, supposed to be in school, or they're listening to instructions, but they're chatting with their friends. So there's really no escape. And I know that that's not a great word, but I think that's what socialization is. It's a way to escape. It takes you out of the framework of what you normally do with your work. And I know I worked, working with hard to serve people for decades. And what I learned was work was an escape. Meaning you got out of the house, you went to work, and then when you left work, you came home. So you had two different environments to kind of, decompress, calm down, separate, and then talk to somebody about what happened in that other environment. And when you aren't working and you're at home 24, my wife and I have to really sit down and talk to each other in a way different than we've ever experienced, because, we're getting on each other's nerves, or, I'm acting out, or I have a temper tantrum, or she's just not performing at the level I think she should be, or she should be doing more work. And both of our careers have been impacted by this, obviously, as well. So that's the perfect storm. And then for people that are seeking mental health support right now, I talked to a family the other day, because I get a lot of calls whenever I do something like this. And, they're telling me that it's taken them 60 to 90 days to get an appointment with a behavioral health specialist. And just so for family, somebody calls me, they're going to get a call back within 24 hours. They're saying they're so grateful just to be able to talk to somebody. And I give people, I like to say permission. Look, feel your feelings, be upset, but don't do it alone.
Right.
Don't do it alone. And if I have to be that one that is their sounding board, and, I'll give anybody a 20-minute free coaching call. The idea is just to have someone to talk to, and because most people we suffer from a lot of shame-based and embarrassment when we're not feeling well. We don't want to tell our significant other, I'm feeling down. I mean, there are people that do it. They complain all the time. They're always down. And they require a different kind of intervention. But, we're not comfortable with admitting we have a problem.
And that's something I was going to ask you about, Scott, was you've written some things about the stigma that goes along with addiction, and the stigma that goes along with seeking help and asking for help. What is your approach to talking to somebody about that stigma, or talking somebody through that stigma, and making them realize it is okay to ask for help? It's not a knock on you. It doesn't make you less of a person. How do you combat that stigma that somebody might feel when it comes to asking for help, or saying those words, those 3 words that you talked about earlier, I need help? Talk about that a little bit, Scott.
Well, first and foremost, I think the stigma is, a lot of it, is just around the fact that people are afraid. And, some people are egocentric. Some people just believe that, I remember I used to get told, well, if you didn't pick up a drink, would you have a drinking problem? Well, I have a drinking problem. I had one. And there's stigma behind the fact that, it's not a moral failing. It's a disease. So if somebody, approximately 15% of the U.S. has an active addiction issue that will erupt over the next 12 months. But this is even more interesting to me, is each person who potentially is actively in their addiction, meaning untreated substance use disorder, again, gambling, sex, internet, whatever, food, eating, whatever it might be, they will negatively impact 7 people every day. So if 70% of the population is getting negatively impacted by the 15% that are going around untreated, That's 85% of our population. So the fact that we still have the stigma to people seeking help because it may be a sign of weakness, or it's a sign that you're unable to manage your own life. At the end of the day, if you don't get help, you're going to continue in this situation where you're in this trajectory of pain and you're not sleeping well and you're acting out. So eventually, going untreated, no one's going to get better on their own. So the idea of asking for help, I'd like to find a way to make it as popular as saying, make mine a Big Mac, supersize me. Let's get it going, or let's go to the movies, or I need gas in my car. Until we get it to be as common as that, we're going to see people continue on this treadmill of pain. And, there is hope and help, and it's treatable. But for those who have a disease, they don't get a choice. I didn't get a choice. Yep. It is a disease, just like diabetes, and you don't get a choice. What's interesting with diabetes, you go in, you see the doctor, you get tested, you get your blood work done. They give you insulin, and they give you a way to monitor your blood sugar level. And you know what? You can live a normal life. I like to believe I can live a normal life. And I've just passed 37 years of continuous sobriety. And I share that publicly. Thank you. Not to brag, but to let people know. And I work at it every day.
Yeah.
Not a lot. It doesn't take a lot of time, but and I'm pretty much still compulsive, obsessive, addictive. That's part of my makeup. So I have to manage that. And I do it by going to meetings, by talking to others. I do a ton of volunteer work, and I work with families, who don't have resources to try to help them navigate. And, professionally, I get paid for what I do when I can. But I also know there's a lot of people out there that have spent a ton of money on their family members, and the relapse continues. I mean, again, 15% have an issue, 10% will seek help. And of the 10% that get into treatment, 95% of them will relapse, generally their first time around.
Repeat those numbers for me. So we got 15% of the population.
Yeah, 15% of the population has an active addiction that will erupt over the next 12 months. Of the 15% that have that active addiction issue, only 10% will seek help. And of the 10% that seek help, 95% of those people will relapse, generally within the first 30 or 60, 90 days of treatment. So what happens is, and now what's happening, those numbers have probably shifted even more. First of all, getting into treatment's hard, because all of the treatment providers, especially inpatient, have had to reduce their client population because of COVID and, social distancing and healthy distancing and treatment, because it's been mandated by the different licensure people, and the Society of Addiction Professionals really need to know that. And they're doing it if they're licensed. And the denial has gotten even higher, that I can manage this. And then, of course, that 15% that science has said exists out there, it's anecdotal, but I believe that 15% may be as high as 20% now because of what happened with COVID, that perfect storm. Yep. So it's created more people that are abusing, and maybe even creating more people that are now suffering from addiction than ever before, because they might have been on the edge, but by having a job to go to, by able to get out of the house and having that separation, they had to stop, because you can't be drunk all day and keep a job.
Right. Yeah. They're forced to behave, so to speak.
Correct. They kind of have to hold their breath half the day. Right. But now they're at home, doing this. And I mean, I've talked to people doing interventions that actually are sitting there drinking, knowing they're talking to an interventionist and wants to help them. Right. And, they try to block their screen, and I can hear them taking a sip. And I said, look, if you're sitting here drinking while we're talking, and you're telling me you don't have an issue, I want to believe you, but I'm not going to believe you, because it's really hard to do that. So why don't you reach back out when you're not drinking? Well, it seems like the only time I feel good is if I'm drinking. And I'm using alcohol as an example, but it can be anything from smoking marijuana, taking fentanyl, and you hear, in the news today about the overdoses. And one of the most horrific stories I've ever heard was a week and a half ago in Connecticut, where a 13-year-old had overdosed, 13-year-old teenage boy. And when the police went to the house to search the house, they found 100 bags of fentanyl, a 13-year-old. And there weren't, I haven't heard stories that were older siblings, so it looks like it was his stuff, or he was holding it for somebody. But That's the kind of thing that's skyrocketing right now. That's the kind of thing that's taking people's lives at a rate we've never seen. Is north right now about 300 a day in our country, just behind opioids. And a lot of it is what's called counterfeit medication that people are getting and accidentally overdosing.
Right. We're having record overdoses, record drug use in the country right now. Again, we could talk till the cows come home about how it's getting here, who's at fault, who's the main perpetrators. But the reality is we have a real issue with it. And fentanyl, I virtually know nothing about fentanyl. I mean, I've heard stories that, that you could fit on a fingernail or a pinhead, I think I've heard, is enough to kill of straight fentanyl is enough to kill a human being. And in the hospitals, they use it in a controlled environment. But yeah, when it becomes a street drug and they start to lace other drugs with something that's so deadly, it becomes a very, very scary proposition. I mean, back when I was, a teenager and in my 20s, and had friends that or ran in circles where people were, maybe doing a little cocaine or smoking weed or whatever. I don't ever recall hearing stories of a hot batch of whatever that somebody mistakenly took one little bit of this and they were done. They had overdoses, people would overdose, they get through it, and it'd be over. But yeah, this fentanyl thing is just incredibly scary because they don't get to you in a real quick hurry. It's all over but the crying. There's nothing left. There's no chance. So that 13-year-old youngster having access. First of all, I don't even know where a 13-year-old would get something like that. But yeah, we've heard stories of people. Maybe they don't even do the drug themselves. Maybe they're just dealers and they are mixing bags, moving stuff around. One breaks, they ingest a little bit of it and they're done. So very sad deal. The drug thing, the opioid epidemic, just like you're talking about in your new book, the opioid epidemic in this country is outrageous. So you combine that with mental health crisis that we're dealing with. I spoke a number of weeks back with Dion Joseph in Los Angeles. He's an LAPD officer. I'm sure you've heard of him. Angeles Skid Row, talks a lot about homeless people and consults law enforcement agencies all over the world about the homeless. So there you've got your drug addicted individuals. That plays a big part in the homelessness. You've got people losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods, resulting back to drugs and alcohol. So this is a terrible cycle that our country is facing now. Scott, tell me, if Scott could put together a plan, where do we start? Where do we start in doing this? I mean, I know, like me at the Derate the Hate podcast, I'm all about bettering the world one attitude at a time. I try to help people talk about personal accountability, try to change their mind on certain things, think about things a different way. If people as individuals want to help to change what they're seeing in this country, how does that plan start? Whether they're addicted or not, they may not be an addict, but from your perspective, Scott, how do we turn this thing around? We know the facts. We know what's going on. How do we stop it? How do we turn it around? How do we better the world?
Well, first of all, that is probably one of the best questions that we can ask. And I hate the question because, unfortunately, there isn't an easy answer. But I want to go back to a point you made about back in the day, you didn't see people overdosing. People weren't overdosing before. This wasn't happening. I don't know if you remember when Whitney Houston passed away, and, it was Dr. Drew who was all over the media talking about how, musicians and sports figures and people with lots of money doing cocaine and heroin have been doing it for decades. And people were not dying. Michael Jackson, I believe fentanyl was one of the things that was in his system. But when you mix the different drugs, different substances, there's something science doesn't know yet because it really hasn't been studied. So if you're taking an antidepressant, for example, and a lot of kids are, on ADHD medication, people are taking Lexapro or Zoloft or some sort of an anti-anxiety or antidepressant medication, or maybe drinking, but you mix that together with street drugs. Those are the kind of things that are causing, I believe, these overdose rates like we've never seen before. And science doesn't really know how to really diagnose it yet because the studies haven't been put in place. But I think going back to your last question, what do we do? Because here's the thing. Xanax, which is probably one of the most manufactured drugs that people were taking over the last few decades, Xanax is now being cut with fentanyl, meaning they're disguising it. It's called counterfeit medication. And so how do we stop them from taking it? I think we have to inform. I think we have to educate. I think we have to have these kind of conversations, and we have to encourage young people to understand that if you're going to put something in your body, it's not just a drug today that you might be taking. It's a poison. Mm-hmm. It's a poison. Mm-hmm. And you're right about, the overdoses. The overdose rate was about, I think, 100,000 the CDC shared that happened in 2020. And it's very similar in 2021, but they just came out with this new number. They believe the last 2 years, there's been over 2 million overdoses and 200,000 people died. So another 1.8 million people actually overdosed and could have died, but they got a hold of something, usually naloxone, which is now, in Narcan, which is a nasal spray, and somebody saved them. I mean, addicts now are actively carrying around naloxone in their pocket and telling their drug partner, hey, look, or party partner, if something happens to me, put this in my nose. So I think we have to just, have like what we're doing now is families need to have a conversation going, hey, Junior, I read this article about this young kid that overdosed at 13. Can you tell me what's going on with fentanyl? What are you hearing is, even on your virtual school, what are you hearing on the college campus? Because this is what the major killer is right now. Young people are at parties. Someone's giving them something, unbeknownst to them what it is, and they're taking it. And unfortunately, in it is fentanyl. And you're right. I use the pinpoint, not even the pinhead. That small a dose can kill somebody. Wow. And if somebody is on other medication and they're drinking that night, or they're smoking marijuana, or they've taken edibles, even a smaller amount could potentially kill them, because those things mixed together as a cocktail are just like, it's like jumping off a 40-story building. You're not coming back from that. That's not an injury. Right. That's going to be a death. I mean, you can't really predict it. So I think the simple answer to that big question is families need to talk about it. And parents need to do something that they haven't done well over the years, is listen, and not point the finger of shame, not say, don't do fentanyl, don't do drugs, because that, unfortunately, that scenario was studied and it doesn't work. And I was, right. As somebody who was an active user, and I used to be an unlicensed pharmacist, when someone told me no, I
made you want to do it more.
Well, it's like, wait, why would you not want me to do that? And it's fascinating. I've got a bunch of people in the criminal justice system I know pretty well, and the DEA, and they ask when they bust somebody, they ask questions. Where'd you get it? Obviously, they want to try to make more arrests, but why? They ask them, why would you sell a narcotic that kills your consumer?
Right.
And that's my competition, that distributor. And the answer is consistently, whenever overdose hits the news, their business goes up. So that's what we're up against, meaning other people hear about it. And drug seekers, and that's not a politically correct term, and it's a stigmatized term, but I use it because I think people need to understand there are people who actually need opioids to deal with the crisis they have. But on the other hand,
I've got to stop you for a second. I don't mean to interrupt, but why would drug seeker be a stigmatized or non-politically correct? I'm not a fan of political correctness, but I and I'm always baffled by and going to kind of
people think the term is stigmatizing, and my attitude is, one day I was on a big Zoom with probably 400 people, and I used the word drug seeker. And I used the word dope fiend. And I had people in the chat say to me, those are stigmatizing words. Those are labeling people. I said, well, there are people who are drug seekers and there are people who are dope fiends. And I said, I'm one of them. And I say it because I want it to resonate with somebody out there to understand that that person who potentially is a drug seeker probably has an addiction. And if we don't open our arms and say, look, Johnny, come on over here. Let me give you a hug. Because right now, now they're opening up safe injection sites. And, New York City did it, Minnesota. I don't know if they're doing it yet. I'm sure they are, because Minnesota's a pretty progressive state. San Francisco's doing it. So you come in, they test the stuff you have. And if your stuff is street stuff, it's not good. They replace it with pharmaceuticals that can get you
to get you messed up. And I was going to ask,
is that politically correct? I don't know, but I tell you, if it's a tool that works, I'm not going to not support it. But to me, we're going the wrong direction. There was actually a sign, a billboard in San Francisco a few months ago, because someone sent it to me, and it says, when you party with a buddy, make sure you carry naloxone with you to help save their life.
I was going to, and that's the thing that you had mentioned a few minutes ago, and I can't get my mind around. I mean, I've lost a couple friends to drug addiction. I have. It's horrible. I hate drugs, and anything we can do to figure out how to win this battle. But I think we're losing the battle, and I think a sign that we're losing the battle is the fact that we've resorted to safe injection sites, and like you talked about, addicts carrying around whatever you said in their pocket.
Narcan is what they carry around. And Narcan is a dispensary. It's a dispensing mechanism. It's a nasal spray, but in the chemical that's in there, the medication's in there, it's called naloxone. That's the opioid reversing drug for overdoses. And it's the only thing, law enforcement carries it, hospitals have it, but by the time somebody gets transported to a hospital, you said it, they're not going to be alive. If somebody overdoses on an opioid, if somebody isn't there in a matter of minutes, they're not administers that, Narcan or naloxone, because naloxone can be, some law enforcement still inject it. They have like an injector like they do with
like an EpiPen.
Exactly. So the solution to that problem is don't put it in your body. But when you tell somebody who loves to get high or feels they need to get high, don't put that in your body. In their mind, they're saying, thank you for the information. But what they're really saying is, where do I get some of that stuff?
Yeah. No, I think it's a losing battle. Like I said, I can't get my mind around it. It may be the right move, but it's hard for me to comprehend, because like I said,
they call it harm reduction, and it's like methadone is harm reduction. And there's a new term, not new. It's been, a lot of people haven't heard. It's called MAT, medication assisted treatment, where people actually are prescribed by a doctor medication to help them withdraw and come off of opioids usually. And, years ago, I used to believe, because as somebody who's abstinence based, I had to cold turkey. I went through detox, but I actually had medication my first couple of days so I wouldn't have a seizure. So there are certain medications that work really well. And methadone, is one of those that, I don't know how many people take it, but it's federally supervised and DEA compliant. And there are a lot of people that take it to get off of heroin. And some people are on it for a short period of time. A lot of people take it for the rest of their life. And it's called harm reduction. And I learned over the years that, even in our treatment center, somebody comes in and says, look, I don't mind. They do this. They shake their finger. I don't mind giving up alcohol because, alcohol is getting me in trouble. It's getting me DUIs. I lost my license. I lost my job. I lost my wife. But I'm not quitting marijuana. And our attitude is, you know what? If you're willing to come into group and talk about that, we're going to take you in. At a lot of facilities, they just won't touch you if you're on something mood altering. And we're not going to approve people using, but I'd rather help somebody get off of everything they're on and helping them wean off of what they're on, which is harm reduction or medication assisted treatment. Sure. But when they open up these safe sites, because I'm in recovery, I hear a perspective that a lot of the professionals don't hear unless they're in the rooms of recovery. People love the safe sites because they're getting better shit. They say, "Oh, I'm getting better shit when I go to the safe sites." So there are those who will abuse it, but there may be some. And, New York just came out with an article and said we had 18 people that didn't overdose that we were able to help. Okay. I mean, that's not bad news. So is it really something that's working? We'll see. And then keeping it funding up to keep it going. And then, paying people to trade out, good dope for bad dope. It's just, but you know what? If it saves a life, it's a tool.
That's right.
There's a saying we have at our treatment center: one size doesn't fit all. And, we don't care what you did yesterday. If today you want to stop, we'll do everything we can to support you as long as we can do it the right way.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I watched a video that you were talking about in a speech. I think it was with some graduates that you talked about that, we don't have a one size fits all approach, which I think is very, very smart, because human beings, you cannot use a one size fits all approach. One of my biggest arguments about the result of this pandemic is a one size fits all approach has never worked for anything with regard to human beings. And I like the fact that you can custom tailor a program for the individual, because I am a huge proponent of every individual has the ability to work their own life the way that their own life needs to be worked, because we're all unique in some way. And that may mean we all need to seek recovery in a different way, or all addicts need to seek recovery in a different way. So I love that we don't use the one size fits all approach that you talk about, Scott.
Well, it doesn't work with a 95% relapse rate. And those are studies that have been done for decades.
Right.
We actually haven't even reduced it by 1,000th of 1%. And it doesn't matter what treatment model there is out there, whether it's an anonymous program or a 6-month structured program or a 12-month sailing program somewhere in, the Bahamas. It doesn't matter. There is no one treatment modality that has been able to demonstrate that they do it better than anybody else. And it doesn't matter how long you stay, because in a secure, non-decision oriented treatment provider environment on an inpatient basis, the issue is eventually you're leaving there.
Right.
You have 24-hour care. You got people that are doing in group, 5-6 hours a day. You're with a bunch of other men or women, whatever it might be. But when you go home, if you don't have any kind of safety net that has been structured or developed before you leave treatment, you're going to be left to your old thinking. And most people, that's why the relapse rate's so high. It's not seamless. So what we try to do is keep people in treatment longer to give them the tools on an outpatient basis after they've detoxed, after they've stabilized. And then once you remove the anesthesia, the real work starts, because that's when the underlying untreated trauma, behavioral health issues need to be dealt with. It's not just removing the self-medication. It's actually working on the issues that drive someone to want to stay anesthetized.
Right. So let's bring this back, Scott. Let's bring this back to my original question. With the uncertainty of how much longer we're going to be dealing with, maybe it's lockdowns, maybe it's businesses that are still suffering. There's a lot of businesses that are just not going to come back. We know that they've been decimated by whether it be COVID itself or the government's reaction to COVID. In your state, that's one of the worst states in the nation for the government's reaction to the COVID, and how many businesses have been lost. We know those things are done. We're uncertain as to how long the after effects from all that's going to last. What can each individual do, whether they be addicted or not? Maybe they're an addict, maybe they're related to an addict, maybe they're friends with an addict. What is the common denominator? What is the common answer that we can tell everybody from your perspective, Scott H. Silverman? What is the common thing that we can say to all parties to get the biggest effect from your perspective?
Well, you keep asking questions like this, I'll never come back on your show. But here's because you know what? And as you're saying that, I want to come up with practice self-care. Practice self-care. Understand, and if you don't know what that means, Google it. What does practicing self-care mean? To me, it means taking care of me and being the best I can be within myself, whether it's meditation, it's journaling, walking, exercise, gluten-free diet, eating pepperoni pizza every day at 3, playing tennis, watching less. I did an interview on this. It's pretty funny. I did an interview with our local television station here. And one Sunday morning, it was early, I said, you need to stop watching the news sometimes. So the producer, after, gives me this nasty text. He goes, we are a news station. Right? You can't say that. And I said, I didn't mean turn off the TV. What I meant was take a break, go outside, go for a walk, take your dogs for an extra walk, get a goldfish, wear flip-flops, walk around the grass barefoot, walk backwards in your neighborhood, doing something different. Practice self-care, do whatever, drink more water, make better food choices, go to YouTube and look at people who practice self-care, get into mindfulness, get into meditation, get into yoga, do whatever you can to be better, feel better, and act better. And when you do that, not only will you feel better, but you'll be a better person to your significant other, to your children, to your colleagues, to your coworkers, to your community at large. And the biggest reward with all of that is you're going to sleep better and you're going to feel better. And the choices that you will make if you're practicing self-care will be much more of an investment of feeling good. And, I myself, I've lost weight this last year after putting weight on. And, feedback I'm getting from people is, are you sick? No, I lost some weight because I was making some better food choices. Because the first year I wasn't, I'm going to be 68 this month. And I'm thinking about, I don't know, I don't say it out loud about, doing yoga. But the thing is, anything that you can do, and I don't want to put a label on anything for anybody. I don't want to make a suggestion. People, I don't want to do that. Find something that makes you feel good. Do puzzles. I shared earlier, I'm going to get back. I'm like doing metal art. I'm going to get my torch out again. For me, it was such a therapeutic thing. And it's been like 6 years since I turned my torch on. I'm going to do that again in March, getting set up for it now. So, I started a podcast, during, COVID. So for me, maybe it was just before, for me, self-care. That's the one. Self-care. If I had a magic wand and I could get inside everyone's head and heart, and I could give them this, one nugget, practice self-care. And, a lot of people go, I have no idea what that means. I get it. I didn't at one point. We all need to call somebody who does. You look into life coaches in your community. I have a business coach now. I have people that I sponsor in recovery. I have groups that I go on to, and there's a lot. You can't find a Zoom meeting for some interest you have right now that you can't get into. That's totally free. My second favorite F word. Mm-hmm. Take and make a commitment of 10 to 20 minutes a day. And if it feels good, make it 30 minutes. And, mindfulness, my definition of mindfulness, and I'll leave you with this, is living in the minute, living life 1 minute at a time, because anybody can manage that. Practicing self-care. And again, when I say that, I know a lot of people have no idea what I'm talking about. And it's a simple phrase, but still look it up, because in my opinion, if you can do that, every choice you make will come back to the core of what makes you feel good, or makes you feel better, or makes you feel less, in pain or concerned. Is, life's going to throw stuff at us, plan as best you can, but know that circumstances are going to shift that you can't control, and be ready for them as best you can. That's what self-care is. You prepare for things. And all you really do is you manage the problems you have. They're not going to go away, but you become a better, personal manager of your own feelings.
Without a doubt. I mean, at the Derate the Hate podcast, I talk about it every single week, bettering the world one attitude at a time. And I talk about doing it by bettering your life. What have you done today to make your life a better life? That's how we make the world a better place.
By the way, let me interrupt you, please, because I want to tell you something about the word attitude. Attitude is the only thing that I've learned, and I used to teach this to people coming out of jail and prison. Attitude is the only thing you can really control.
That's right.
Think about it.
That's right.
You can't control the weather.
That's
Can't control your family. Can't control your significant other. Can't control your coworkers. Can't control the government. Can't control your utility bills. You can't control, the rain. You can't control, but attitude is the only thing you can't control. So I think I've heard you mention it because I tracked it 8 times at least. And if you can practice that, and that may be even better than self-care, because if your attitude is, I'm going to practice self-care, it's a trigger to move you in the right direction. You're absolutely right. Attitude, What is it? Attitude sets your level of, altitude sets your level of attitude. Attitude sets your level of, I don't know, something like that. Something like that. I can dig it. It makes sense. And I talk about it all the time. We can't control everything that happens around us, but what we can control is how we react to it. And that's where our attitude's at. Scott, it's been an incredible pleasure. You and I could have conversation after conversation. So many things that you're doing are so important for people helping to better their lives, bettering the world by bettering their lives. And it's been a real pleasure having you on the Derate the Hate podcast. I hope we can do it again. Anytime, brother. Anytime. Because you asked me those questions that make me use parts of my gray matter. Now I'll probably lay awake tonight spinning around thinking, I haven't thought about that in a while. But what you're doing is so important. Derate the Hate. I think that's great. And by the way, I'm not quite sure you invited me on LinkedIn. I think I begged you to come on your show. So either way, I got here and I appreciate the opportunity. And I want people to know you can call me, text me anytime, 619-993-2738. And I dare you to call me or text me or find me and email me, because this way we can help each other. And when I help somebody else, I get a benefit from that as well.
Very cool, man. Very cool. I think bettering the world. Let's throw out that phone number again one more time, Scott, and the name of your podcast so that the DTH listeners can check you out there too.
Got it. So the name of my book, by the way, is The Opioid Epidemic. You find it on Amazon. Scott H. Silverman, yourcrisiscoach.com, area code 619-993-2738. You can Google me anywhere and find me. But what's important is make that call. Keep that number. Everybody knows somebody who's suffering, and they don't have to. There is hope. There is help.
Wow. So much important information from another fantastic guest on the Derate the Hate podcast. I cannot thank Scott H. Silverman enough for joining me for this conversation. I got to tell you what, we talked about so many important topics. So much of what we face today in our lives is out of our control. But one thing we can control is our attitude and how we react to it. Just like Scott and I were talking about. If you need help, do not be afraid. Do not succumb to the stigma of addiction. Don't be afraid to say those 3 words. I need help. And Scott H. Silverman might be the person that can help you or help that loved one that is suffering. Are you suffering from a crisis? Are you suffering from an addiction? Is there something going on that you just don't think you can make it through? Maybe give Scott a call. He has a network and an organization that might have the answer that can turn that world around for you, that can change your attitude. If there is somebody in your life that you think may be having a problem, have them listen to this episode. Maybe something Scott or I said in this episode is what turns their life around. You just don't know. Like he said, there's no need to suffer. There is help out there. Let's help them, right? That's what we're here for. Let's help them. If you're suffering, if you know somebody that's suffering, get them in contact with Scott. Again, that phone number is 619-993-2738, or check out his website, yourcrisiscoach.com, or maybe check out his podcast, Happy Hour with Scott H. Silverman. So incredibly grateful to have him as another great guest on the Derate the Hate podcast. With that, I am going to wrap things up. I'm going to say get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. I am Wilk from wilksworld.com. Do me the favor of sharing this with your friends. Share this wherever you get an opportunity, because you don't know who might listen to it because you shared it, and It could be what turns their life around. It could be what changes their attitude, changes their life, and by changing their life, you could change the world. Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week.